Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. Today, we are finally going to look into the completely non-controversial, non-emotionally based conflict that is going on in the nation of Israel between them and the people in the Gaza territory. Now, obviously, we're just going to analyze this. It's not going to endure any emotional reactions or anything like that. There's not going to be a lot of conspiracy theories related to this out there in the audience, because this is a pretty straightforward topic where people can look at either side of the issue and decide to agree to disagree and still become best friends, obviously. Now, obviously, there's some sarcasm in what I'm saying. People are going absolutely crazy over this conflict, and while I am not going to both sides it throughout the course of this video and not take a stance, if you guys watch my channel, you probably know what side I'm going to be on when things come due. However, I do think it is important that we discuss the terror attacks on Israel, and we discuss the military action against Gaza in response to those attacks in honest and blunt terms, so that you guys can form your own opinion, because even though everybody on the internet wants to stop being friends over this, I think people can disagree related to this and still be perfectly fine. You're allowed to be wrong. Am I not gracious to grant you that ability? But before we do that, I do have a website, actualjusticeword.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
And of course, thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform. Now, as you guys know by now at this point in time, on October 7th, which will be a little bit over a week before you guys will be seeing this video out there in the public, Hamas, which is the governing authority in Gaza and also a terrorist organization, launched attacks on Israeli civilians, with notable attacks occurring at a dance/music festival and on a little town community. I forgot the word for it. I think it's like a kibbutz, and other civilian targets within the area. And one of the things that made these attacks so egregious is that Hamas fighters themselves recorded and uploaded videos of their violence because they were absolutely proud of it. One of the videos that definitely sticks out to me from this whole attack was the fact that they had some Thai workers that were there, obviously not Jewish people, and one of them was wounded, and a Hamas fighter was trying to decapitate this person with the back end of a hoe in an absolute act of depravity and violence. Now, I'm going to spare you the particular images from this attack. If you want to watch them and you want to get a very pro-Israeli side, then Ben Shapiro actually did an hour-plus long thing where he wanted you to see the images, so he showed them to you. You can find that. I will link it in the description. However, I do want to point out, if you do look at that, if you do absorb the depravity of these Hamas fighters, if you do acknowledge how violent and disgusting and vile these individuals are, that I also think it is important for you to look at the footage from Gaza, from the military response from the Israeli government, because civilians are getting killed in that situation. Again, I'm not both sidesing it, but it is important for you to see the horrors of war, and more importantly, it's important for you to understand that even though we throw around the term monster here and there, that this is man, this is mankind in conflict, and this is a dark aspect of our human nature that we should all confront and look at. And I do think an informed opinion that looks at the violence, that looks at what we're seeing, is more respectful than the people who look at the horrors experienced by the Israelis or the horrors experienced by the people in Gaza and make their determination based solely on that, or do the mathematical calculations where they say this many people in Gaza died and so much fewer people died in Israel, therefore, because of proportionality, I'm making my judgment based on that. Now, with that being said, I said I would not both sides this. I have a preference for the state of Israel in this particular conflict. I do not hide the fact that this is the case. However, to be clear, I'm not Jewish. I'm not an Israeli citizen. I'm not one of those weirdo Christians that's obsessed with Israel being in Jewish hands or anything of the sort. I have no personal connection to that nation at all. It's just the idea for me of a group that doesn't fit in other countries forming their own nation makes perfect sense, and it's what we've seen throughout all of human history. Germany is for Germanic people, Italy is for Italian people. This is what tends to happen, especially when people cannot live together. You form your own country around either ethnic or religious or some other factor like cultural considerations. To me, it makes perfect sense for the Kurds to want their own state, makes perfect sense for Armenians to want their own state, makes perfect sense for any population that has been a minority that's surrounded by a hostile majority to eventually try to find statehood as their safe haven. Also, you can't feel all that bad for the Arabs because A, this is a disingenuous push for a so-called free Palestinian state. Remember, they were ruled by the Ottoman Turks in the Ottoman Empire for centuries, and there was no such movement for a free state because they were perfectly fine as long as there weren't Jews ruling over an area. And when the British took possession of this territory at the end of World War I, they were offered this map from the Peel Commission. You can look it up for yourself. And even though they have control over virtually everything, all of the holy sites, they still rejected it. They still said the Jews being in this corner was not enough. So in my opinion, you have a legally established state, which the British gave to the Israelis. The Arabs rejected overwhelmingly favorable deals in their favor. And then they started this movement for statehood after the fact because, oh my God, we definitely need to totally be free. This Palestinian cause was definitely totally a thing. So for Jewish people, it just makes sense. Now we will address what should happen to the people in Gaza and in the West Bank, or what should have happened in the past, a little later in this video. But to be clear, I have unambiguous condemnation for the terrorist attacks against the sovereign nation of Israel. Don't support it, and I am absolutely disgusted, yet not surprised, by the mask-off moments that we've seen from the American left, from the world left, where people not only embrace the decolonization drive of the Palestinian people, but specifically embrace the violence against Israeli civilians, which, by the way, some of these people say there are no Israeli civilians. They're all fighters, or they're all settlers, or they're all occupiers, or whatever. And of course, they support some of the most disgusting aspects of the attacks that we saw on October 7th, like the music festival massacre. I mean, one of the things that was really striking to me, and I don't want to get bogged down too much in the reaction, but this just stuck out so much, was the protest in New York City, where you had the DSA talking and cheering on the specific massacre and specific abductions that occurred at that music festival.
And as you might have seen, there was some sort of rave or desert party where they were having a great time until the resistance came in electrified hang gliders and took at least several dozen hipsters. But I'm sure they're doing very fine despite what the New York Post says.
Now, this is the DSA. This is not an Islamic group. A lot of people are pointing to Islamic groups and the horrible things that they're saying about the Jews, which, by the way, people say it's about Israelis. Let's be real. It's about the Jews. But to hear these folks, of all folks, talk about the hippies that were at this festival and how they deserve this and to cheer it on, when democratic socialists are the most likely people to go to this kind of festival, really shows you how that decolonization ideology has infected people in the United States of America, and how you basically can do whatever you want to people that they've painted as the villain because they don't see the humanity, because they've been convinced that colonization, settling, whatever buzzword they want to use to describe it, justifies all manner of evil against those people. So to me, it's just crazy to see this many people who are specifically not of the Muslim world, not sympathetic due to the religious cause or whatever, even though those people are mixed up in there, to cheer on the violence against people that are more like them than those who committed the attacks. It's disgusting. It is absolutely horrifying. And these people are all over this country. They're in major left-wing institutions. And it really goes to show you that if something is seen as an outpost of the West, if something is seen as something that is backed by the United States of America, these people will attack that, hate it to their core, because it is a proxy for the United States of America, for capitalism, or for whatever thing, whatever buzzword they are trying to target. Now again, not interested in both sidesing it, not interested in saying, oh, this is equivalent to that, or any of the tricks that you see on social media, but somebody in the comments is going to reference that there were like 5 or 6 Jewish people that were interviewed in New York City as well, and they had pictures of Gaza as a parking lot on their phone.
And Israel need to do like this. You see? Now Gaza like this. Gaza need to do like this. Or like this, but all this Jewish.
In something that was clearly and obviously more goofy than anything. But that being said, anybody who's calling for the wiping out or elimination of the people of Gaza, whether they're doing it with a smile on their face or not, is calling for genocide. And obviously, we're not in favor of that on this channel. I feel like that should go without saying. I feel like that should be obvious to the general population out there in the world. So politicians or whatever that are saying level the area or punish them in all these different crazy ways, not about that. I'm not interested in that. Again, I have a preference for the state of Israel because I just think it logically makes sense if you're a Jewish population or if you're any minority population that has come into conflict with the majority around you for you to form your own state. But I don't mean to suggest in any way, shape, or form that you should just kill people in Gaza indiscriminately just because they're vehemently opposed to the existence of your state. Now, you guys might be noticing throughout the course of this video that I'm trying really, really hard to avoid any specific claims or specific claims that you guys might be aware of that are unverified at this point in time. And the reason I'm intentionally doing that is because we have a fog of war situation, we have a game of telephone where a claim I've seen changed in real time to be more exaggerated and thus easier for the so-called anti-propagandists in order to debunk, and it's just chaotic all the way around. What I will advise you is to not post specific claims that are unverified, especially if they already confirm your bias. You're going to see a lot of headlines, a lot of articles, a lot of slight alterations of what was initially specifically claimed, and then a debunk based on those specific alterations that were made through the game of telephone or intentionally made, and it just creates a whole mess. So I will go over specific things in other videos in the future, but as of right now, I'm trying to be as general as possible, because even in this video, I am sure there are going to be some things that I believe to be true and confirmed that are going to turn out to not be true in the future. So I just want to give that caveat. If you're wondering why I'm not talking about 40 babies, or I'm not talking about maybe a doll in the Gaza Strip or whatever, there's a specific reason for that. And that's because I'm waiting for that information to become clear so that in the future I can address it when all the facts are available. Now look, obviously you guys out there in the audience come to me for solutions. You want me to solve the Israeli-Palestinian debacle in one YouTube video, and even though that may sound like a Herculean task to many of you out there in the audience, I am Sean of the Actual Justice Warrior, and I will solve this problem in the next 2.5 minutes with my expert analysis of where things went completely wrong. And obviously, again, I'm being sarcastic. And the reason why I'm being sarcastic is even though I have a preference for Israel, I actually think that long term, the Palestinian cause is definitely going to win. And I'll explain why. And it's really pretty simple. It's based on a failure in 1967, an opportunity that was not taken by the Israelis, and an opportunity that has since since passed that will thus lead to enduring conflict and shifts in public opinion against Israel, and eventually it will lead to the overrunning of the Jewish state. Now, in 1967, you guys are probably aware of the Six-Day War. In that period of time, the Israelis expanded their borders to encompass the Gaza Strip and parts of the West Bank that previously belonged to Egypt and Jordan, respectively. Now, prior to this, there was an incident where the Jewish state was formed, and there was an expulsion of Jews from many Islamic countries in the surrounding area. This could have been used as precedent by the Israelis to push those people who are currently being governed by Egypt and governed by Jordan into those nations respectively. However, the Israelis did not take that opportunity. Instead, these states, in a very clever move, essentially left these people in a no man's land kind of situation to become a problem for the Israelis. Now, when you force people out based on religion or based on ethnicity, people will refer to this as ethnic cleansing. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, Sean, if we define the expulsion of a population based on religious or ethnic differences as ethnic cleansing, wouldn't the Jewish expulsion from the Middle East that you just referred to fall into that category? And the answer to that question, of course, is shut up. Shut your face. There are no same standards on all sides of this issue. They do not exist. So shut your mouth and only pay attention to countries that are seemingly more Western, because those are the only nations that we have standards and expectations for. By the way, ethnic cleansing can also potentially include killing those people. Obviously, when you're killing people as a form of ethnic cleansing, that is worse than just moving them out. But the thing is, population transfers do happen all the time. Obviously, we don't want to live in a world, especially us in the Western context, where you're throwing people out based on ethnicity or based on religion. But in the history of the world, this is quite a common thing. When India and Pakistan was broken off, there was a forced exodus of Hindus from the newly created Pakistani territory and from some Muslims in the newly created Indian territory. So this is a common practice. It's an ugly practice. It's an ugly part of human history. But as a matter of practicality, when you have two populations that can't live together, and you have sovereign nations that already have governing authority over those populations, you can't end up in a situation where the territory becomes neither of the two nations that surround it, because obviously this is going to lead to said conflict. Now, there are many people on the pro-Israel side who are quick to point out that the Egyptians patrol their border and they don't let people out of Gaza as well. They participate in the so-called open-air prison, but to be clear, the Egyptians do try to supply aid and whatnot to the Gazan people, but the Israelis block that off because they're not trying to aid this population that is a hostile population to their government that exists in this no man's land. There is a similar situation in the West Bank, although Hezbollah is actually far more sophisticated than Hamas in the Gaza Strip, so it's different enough that it could be seen as a different type of problem, even though the same issue at its core is the existence of the Jewish state. But whatever, that's not what we're talking about today. Obviously, the opportunity, in my opinion, to have a secure Jewish state and have somewhere for these people to go was in 1967. However, that option is non-existent anymore. And when that option is non-existent anymore, you end up with this population that can claim this perpetual victimization, and eventually, over time, either by Israel's choice or by international pressure or by a war that eventually they won't be able to win, these people will be in Israel proper, in my opinion. And yes, this is my very black pill perspective. And by the way, this is not something that we haven't seen before. This is not something that we haven't seen before in the Arab world. This is not even something that we haven't seen before in the countries immediately surrounding Israel. Lebanon used to be, up until pretty recently, a generation and a half ago, a majority Christian country. About 60% of their population was Christian, and this was a period of time where Beirut was referred to as the Paris of the Middle East. Well, guess what? in part due to an influx of Palestinian refugees and Muslim migration to the area. Lebanon slowly but surely inverted from a 60% majority Christian nation to a nation where about 30% of the population is Christian. And in that period of time, you had Islamic groups demand Sharia law. You have a new setup for their government where they have two positions of power that are reserved for a Shia and a Sunni, while the president of Lebanon is reserved as a Christian position. And of course, as you might imagine, the president of Lebanon is a symbolic ceremonial position with no real power, and a lot of people in Lebanon describe themselves as living as second-class citizens in what used to be their own country. In my opinion, this is a best-case scenario for the Israelis when eventually the Arabic nations or the Palestinian population, whatever you want to call them, I honestly do not care, overruns this country in the future. Now again, obviously this is the long term. Right now, Israel has the clear and obvious military advantage, but if you look at public opinion in a nation like the United States of America, you can see once you get under the age of 45, which is the next generation of this country, or the next two generations of this country, it goes below 50%, and people become more sympathetic of the Palestinian cause. When the United States, which is one of the biggest backers of Israel, abandons them, abandons support for them, this will put pressure on them to incorporate this population, which is clearly and obviously a hostile population, and what we will see is Israelis, again, best case scenario, as second-class citizens in what used to be their own country, and more likely scenario because they're Jewish people, and I can actually see what people in Hezbollah and Hamas say about Jewish people, we will see their population reduce by them being forced out of the nation, and those who don't get forced out will be killed, and we might end up in a scenario like we had pre the establishment of Israel, when it was under Ottoman Turkish rule, where the Israeli or Jewish population is kept to about 10% of the Arabic population. It's funny because when I talk to people and they say, why do you say they can't live together? They used to live together, and they point to the years where they live together. It's always them living together under the circumstance where the Islamic population is 90+% and the Jewish population is below that percentage. So yeah, even though I have my preference based on the fact that I think it makes sense for minority groups, whether they be religious or ethnic minority groups, to form their own states because this is the history of the world, even though I have my preference because, like it or not, Israel is seen as an outpost of the West, and taking down this nation is seen as a stepping stone in taking down the West. I understand how people who are more emotionally invested in this conflict can come to a difference of opinion. There are a lot of people, even by the way, secular people who are raised in Muslim households, who feel very strongly emotionally related to this topic. And obviously, Israel is not a perfect nation. I'm not going to defend the actions of their government in any regard. But yeah, there's emotional connections that run deep on both sides of this issue that I just don't have. It's just an analytical thing for me. I think it makes sense for them to have a country, but long term, I definitely see them losing the battle on this, just because I can track where public opinion is going. And honestly, my hope is if they can't maintain themselves as a state, that we can get the nuclear weapons out of there before one of these jihadi regimes eventually ends up overrunning them. So yeah, in conclusion, obviously the terrorist attacks on Israel are absolutely horrible. I feel terrible about the hostages, by the way, some of them American, that are currently being held in Gaza under threat of execution. And we've all seen the videos of people being paraded around dead so that people can celebrate and spit on their corpses, and all the other horrors that were put on our screens through the internet, and honestly probably through advertisements that are being played on this video for mid-rolls and pre-rolls. We all understand that. We all accept that that is an unbelievable horror. But more importantly, for an American context, because I know a lot of you want to think about how this impacts you personally in the United States of America, I do think it's notable all of the people who are not just supporting the Palestinian cause in vague terms, but are specifically supporting the terror attacks and all the positive references to the hang gliders that we've seen from groups like Black Lives Matter Chicago and all these other places, because that is a specific reference to the massacre that happened at the music festival. Again, whatever you think about Israel, set it aside for a second and realize that these people are in our nation. These people are in our institution. These people use the justification that they're colonizers or settlers, which is the same exact thing they call white people in the United States of America, and they're celebrating the open murder of them at a festival. If you think that that is just reserved for Jewish people in the state of Israel, I got news for you. That's the exact fate a lot of these people and a lot of these left-wing groups imagine for you. And that, for me, setting aside all opinions about what's going on in Israel and Gaza and just looking at it from an American perspective, is a chilling prospect that this many people are this cheerful about this type of massacre. But hey, those are just my thoughts, and I know some of you are going to be writing unsubscribe in the comments of this, but I don't care. I'm not here to placate any of your individual opinions. I'm here to tell you what I think. That's why you came to my channel for my opinion. That's why you clicked on this video. And you can't really tell me that you're putting the United States of America first and foremost when you agree with me on all these other topics and then you unsubscribe over my position on a conflict in the Middle East. Seems like you got Israel first and foremost on your mind. I'm just saying that seems to be where you're coming from. So be free, set yourself free, no hard feelings or anything like that. If you liked the video, then show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the attacks on Israel. Yes, I pronounced it like that. Till next time.